Hello, everyone. Welcome. I see folks starting to come on in. We will give everyone a moment to join us. Lovely to see some familiar names joining this session. We always love to know where people are dialing in from. So if you're just joining us, feel free to pop in the chat where you are located. It's always fun to see folks from all over the country and all over the world. Welcome, everyone. Awesome. I know folks are still rolling in, but we will go ahead and at least get the housekeeping out of the way. So welcome. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us for Customer Success Unlocked today. I'm Marley Wagner. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Digital Customer Success here at ESG. Today's webinar session is titled Using Voice of the Customer to Increase Customer Retention, a topic I'm super excited to chat with our guest about. Before I introduce her, just a few very quick housekeeping notes. Today's session will be fireside chat style interview and conversation. So you may not be seeing slides on your screen throughout the session. I promise there is nothing wrong with your Zoom. You're doing just fine. Second, I just like to remind everyone that we are recording today, and you will receive a copy of this recording in your email within about 24 hours or so. And then lastly, throughout our session today, please feel free. We love audience questions, so please submit your audience questions via the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen. It's actually my favorite thing during these webinars when your questions, our lovely attendees, are better than my questions. I love it when I get to ask your questions instead of my own. So we will get to as many of those as we possibly can. And without further ado, I want to welcome our wonderful guest today, my friend who I'm so excited to chat with, the wonderful Anita Toth. Thank you so much for joining us, Anita. Welcome.
I'm so happy to be here. I'm going to give a little wave hello. I'm in Canada, actually, just outside Toronto. So part of this international crew that we have, and looking forward to spending the next hour talking voice of the customer, increasing customer retention, and of course, answering any questions you have.
Love it. Amazing. Welcome. Yeah, I see people in the chat from all over. I love it. So fun to see. The Netherlands. Ooh, that's cool. What time is it there? Turkey? That's amazing. Welcome, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. Super excited to chat with Anita about this topic today. So I want to dive right in because I know we have a ton to cover. So Anita, you're really kind of known in customer success as, I call you the queen of customer interviews, and you're like the voice of customer guru, if you will. So I'm curious, what about this particular area of customer success and customer experience first intrigued you to sort of specialize in this work, and what has kept you going and kind of helping companies gather these insights over the years?
That's a great question. Like, most people don't get excited about customer feedback the way I do. I seriously love it. Just like, I hire an accountant because I don't get the whole accounting thing, but he's so passionate about it. So I'm equally as passionate about customer feedback. And I think it comes from when I was a kid. Oh, I drove my parents crazy. Why? Why does it have to be like this? Tell me why. So I'm an incredibly curious person. And I always want to understand what's going on behind the scenes, or what's going on behind what I'm seeing. Mm-hmm. So I think this curiosity, this passion to know, just is what drove me. So I wind up in university. I actually have 2 degrees in geography. I know it's not maps and map making and stuff like that. That's cartography, something totally different. But there's a social science part of geography, which really lends itself to human behavior across space. Okay, that's about the best I can describe it. So it was there that I started to learn about qualitative research methods, things like observational analysis and watching how people behave in space and across space. So, whether it's following them where they walk, going through neighborhoods to see the impact of people's behavior when there's sidewalks and when there isn't sidewalks, right to things like surveys. We did a lot of focus groups and, of course, customer interviews. And surveys are great. I like them, but I love customer interviews because you get to ask that question. Well, I don't ask why. I phrase it this way. Tell me a little bit more. Tell me a little bit more about your experience. Tell me a little bit more about how you felt when that happened. So I've just taken these skills. I worked for 14 years in a research institute at a university. This is all we did: surveys, focus groups, interviews. I was laid off and I, tried a bunch of different things. And then I realized that there was a need for the skill set that I have in customer success. So this is how I wound up here. And I'm thrilled that I still get to use this skill set and this passion that I have, but now to help drive better business outcomes. And for me, the most important thing is better customer experiences.
Yes, I love that. I did not know about the major in geography, actually. That is new.
2 of them.
Yeah.
2 degrees.
Look at you. I love it. Well, and your passion for doing this and for advocating for customers is so evident whenever you and I talk about this, whenever I hear you speak. And in the work, we've actually had the pleasure of working together on a couple of customers with you and with us here at ESG. And it's just so apparent in your work. So I'm super excited to dig into the nitty gritty of VOC and customer interviews today. So, as I said, you and I have talked many times about voice of the customer, and I've heard you refer to sort of the 3 layers of voice of the customer, if you will, like the Russian nesting doll concept that really made me have an aha moment. So will you walk everyone through that kind of Russian nesting doll 3-layer voice of customer concept?
Yeah, absolutely. Because voice of the customer just on its own, it sounds like a nebulous concept. Like, what is it? So it's easier if you can break it down. And there's the 3 components. So if you will, the biggest doll is voice of the customer. So this is your overarching program. This will include everything from employee feedback, listening tours, testimonials, customer advisory board. Like, you have this overarching, I guess, and it's company wide. And then you kind of get down to what the second layer is, and that's customer feedback. So customer feedback then doesn't necessarily include things like testimonials or case studies. And what these are getting into where you have more formal outreach. So you're doing things like surveys and focus groups and interviews, no surprise. But then the smallest layer is actually, that's where your observational data is. So you're observing customer behaviors. That's your transaction data, your usage data. That's kind of the smallest, but that really doesn't tell you a whole lot when it's so tiny. So you couch that in bigger customer feedback, mostly those qualitative elements. Like I said, focus groups, surveys, interviews, maybe listening tours. And then you take it again, big to the voice of the customer, which is company wide. And it's also including social media comments, customer reviews, all sorts of different types of customer feedback. So when you get at this VOC level, you need a strategy. How are you going to execute? Who's involved in it in the company? Then you get down and ask, well, what types of feedback are we wanting to collect? And then to the smallest, what types of observational data do we want to collect? So you have to have all 3 layers sort of working together in order to fill in those data gaps that can sometimes, cause either a poor customer experience or sometimes lead to decisions that maybe aren't in the best interest for the company.
Yeah, and I think something that always stands out when you and I talk about this is that you are so focused on the need to include both quantitative and qualitative data into this analysis. And I think we as customer success leaders, actually, I've seen it go both ways, where either you're really focused on quantitative and you're really, really just super focused in that area, or you're really focused on qualitative alone. And neither of those really works in a silo. Can you talk about why that is, why you need both, why you can't sort of pick and choose one or the other?
Absolutely. So quantitative is great. It gives you hard numbers. You can benchmark it. You can compare. The other thing is it's easy. It's easy to count. Numbers are easy. The problem is you don't have any context around those numbers. So that's where the qualitative comes in, is to give you the why. Remember, I said I was like so curious, like why are these numbers trending this way? So you have a choice. You can either make up the story in your head and say, well, it's market conditions, it's this, it's that, or you can go to your customers directly and ask them. So if you notice in a particular customer segment that numbers are trending in a certain way, reach out to 5, 10, 15 of them and ask what's going on. And you might find through there that, maybe it wasn't market conditions. Maybe there was some government regulation came in that you didn't know about, right? Like, yeah. Quantitative data is wonderful and you need it, but it gives you no context. Qualitative data is great. It gives you all the context, but it can be very overwhelming as well, because it's just the amount of information you get. So you're kind of constantly trading off between the two, but there does need to be balance. I fully agree, because too heavy in one way, and then you're making up stories and trying to justify the data if you have too much quantitative. And if you have too much qualitative, then it really gets hard to track things over time, and it gets very easy to be taken off course, because now, we heard 3 customers say this, it must be really important. But you really don't know for sure until you use some quantitative data, so maybe some surveys, to find out, hey, does this little pattern that we're seeing across the customers that we spoke to, are we seeing this across our larger customer base? Yes or no? So you really want to use them to work together. They really shouldn't be separated as we sometimes think of them, one or the other.
Absolutely. And it's funny. It makes me think of, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? The customer who complains the loudest, right? Maybe that's qualitative data right there, right? Even if you're not asking for it, if they're complaining, that absolutely is qualitative data. And so it is super important when you're getting that qualitative data, again, even if it's unsolicited, our favorite asterisk kind of qualitative data, to go back to your quantitative data and say, hey, does this make sense? Am I connecting the dots in the right way here? So you mentioned surveys, right? Which is, I think, the first place a lot of people's brains go, right, when we talk about voice of the customer. It's sort of I don't know, you have that lightning reaction. Voice of customer, survey. I'm gonna use a survey. I'm gonna ask a question. Natural, I think that's fine. But I think we need to be careful about surveys. And I think we need to be thoughtful about surveys. So first, I want to ask you, and like no shade on surveys here. Absolutely, there's a time and a place and an appropriate usage for them. But I want to ask you what customer success leaders and teams should stop doing when it comes to surveys, because I bet there are a few things.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you're asking this, because again, we only know what we see other people doing. And if they're all doing NPS, let's say, we'll have a look at NPS. You think that's what's needed, but sometimes it's not. So one of the things I actually had a discussion with somebody really recently about this, and they wanted to add a survey to their post onboarding experience. And I said, wonderful. She goes, yeah, we've implemented NPS. And I went, like, whoa, okay. NPS, traditionally has been used in terms of loyalty. If you want to know, though, what a customer's experience was like post on or during the onboarding process, why don't you just ask them that? Why don't you just ask them questions around it? So that's one of the most common things I see is the misuse of surveys or the inappropriate use of it in the customer journey. So if you want to know what the onboarding experience was like, then ask questions around that. Don't use NPS as a way to, again, you have no context, right? If there's certain things that you want to specifically gather. NPS, typically one question, maybe a comment box. It's like, I don't know, it's, instead of using a hammer to hammer a nail, you're now using, I don't know, like a shotgun. I have no idea. Do you know what I mean? Like
screwdriver.
But screwdriver it's, I guess, yeah.
Closer. All right, shotgun. We'll go shotgun.
We'll go shotgun. And the reason why I say this is there was a saying in marketing where it's kind of spray and pray. Right? Where you just kind of hit it out. And that's sort of what it feels like a lot of customer success leaders do when they're first implementing NPS. They don't have a strategy, so they just kind of throw it out there at points where they think it makes sense, rather than sitting down and saying, does this make sense for the situation? More importantly, does this make sense for what we're looking to gather? And that's really the starting point. If you want to know about the onboarding experience, ask about the onboarding experience. If you want to know what the renewal process was like, perhaps, then ask questions about that. Don't use NPS and hope that you get some useful answers. Just ask directly. It's okay. In fact, I think people prefer it.
Absolutely. I think, and it's not, we could have another session about picking on NPS, but this doesn't apply to NPS only, right? It's just about, hey, what is the purpose of this survey that you are putting into place? What information are you trying to gather from that survey? And hey, is a preset survey type like NPS or CSAT or customer effort score, does one of those, pre-existing sort of standard survey types make sense? Does that tell you the information you want to know? Do you want to know if the onboarding process was easy or hard? Then maybe a customer effort score initial question, at least, could make sense, right? With follow-ups, probably, for more context. But it's really about matching, again, like you said, the purpose, the information you're trying to gather with that survey type. And not all survey types are created equal. And I think sometimes we get afraid of free form surveys, if you will, right? We're like, oh, our surveys need to fit into these sort of pre-prepared, pre-categorized, commonly used survey types, like I just mentioned. And I don't think that's always the case, right? I think it's okay to think outside the box. It's okay to ask the why questions. And I think customers actually really like it when you as a brand are a little bit human in that, right? It doesn't have to be quite so robot-y all the time. And hey, this is the same survey that I'm getting from every vendor I use, and I'm answering the same question. No, I think personally, for me as a customer, I love it when I get surveys that are specific to that company and that experience. And it shows me that they actually want to know what I think. Right. And that they might do something with that information rather than, oh, I want this metric to show to my board, right?
Right. And before we leave the topic of surveys, I want to say this because you hinted at it, Marley, and that is that there are different types of surveys. So doing an annual longer survey, like people think, oh no, it's got to be short. Attention spans are short. And I beg to differ. We ran just last year. I think we had about 700 respondents, sent it out to about 5,000 people. It was over 30 questions long. And it was a mix of qualitative, so asking them to comment in the box, as well as quantitative. So, things like where they're located, how long they've been in the job, different things like that. And people were happy to do it. the biggest thing that I want to try to get in people's minds is you can, I don't want to say make surveys fun, but you kind of can. And that is by closing the loop. So instead of just, putting your surveys out there and then collecting the feedback and that's that, what you can do is send out either through email or in-app, however it's going to be. And you might have to work with your marketing team on this, but sending out what were the results of the survey? What did you find? But in a way that's interesting to the customer. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's got to be interesting to them. So we found 33% of customers who answered this question also are, answered this question in this way. And then you go, oh, wow, I was one of that 33%. And I didn't know that other people also thought this way or did that. Right. And then one of the most interesting things I've seen is when through surveys or even interviews, when that information goes up to senior management and you ask for their opinion, and then you put it in that communication. And so that people can see that there is a direct link between what feedback they gave all the way up to the executive level. And that it wasn't just, lost in whatever, the ether there somewhere. It is actually being listened to. And then the last part is creating curiosity. So our next survey is going to be on blank. And it's, again, got to be something that's interesting to the customer, right? So if you just put usage rates, how exciting is that? But, what are something like that? This is where marketing comes in handy. Sure. Speak to your marketing department. What would be a good hook? Because we're creatures of habit, but we can also be trained in some ways. So by having that curious open loop, when that email comes the next time with the next survey, especially if it's a longer annual one, people remember that you closed the loop, that it went up to the exec level, that it was interesting to them. So they're more likely to fill it out. So getting higher response rates for surveys, closing the loop is actually the key, because it shows that people's feedback has been heard. And that even if you want to go one step further and show how has it been acted on, what changes were made. Mm-hmm. So there's many ways to do this. So low response rates, that just means that you just have to add this extra bit on, which is closing the loop. And really marketing, if you can get your marketing team in there helping, it makes your job so much easier, because they're the ones who know how to, sort of couch the conversation in a way that's interesting enough to get customers to open the emails or to respond.
Yeah, absolutely. I always, whenever I think about surveys, I think of sort of a non-traditional example actually in our B2B world, but Nordstrom, consumer brand, does, like you talked about making surveys fun. They award points and you can get Nordstrom notes and whatever by taking their surveys. And I will be the first to admit I'm a mild shopaholic, so I definitely get many Nordstrom surveys. And so they don't ever ask me NPS, first of all, or, rate this thing on a scale of 1 to 10. They send really long surveys, like many questions all the time. And I answer them, right? Because they do all those things you just talked about, right? They make it fun, they make it engaging, they hook you in with something that is relevant to me as their customer. And then they follow up. What did they do about it, right? So I think that's actually a really, really good example of many of the things that you just talked about.
And can I ask you this, Marley?
Yeah.
So what is it that keeps you answering these? Because it sounds like you've done it more than once. So if you could, share that, maybe somebody can have a little insight on how they can use it with their customers.
It's a great question. I'm going to psychoanalyze myself here for a minute. I think I'm the kind of person who likes to share my opinion, right? I like to be heard in general. And again, this is a retailer that I'm loyal to. So, hey, if I can continue to to help shape what that looks like and make it even better for my needs and what I want and what I'm looking for. Like, yeah, sure, great. And if I might win a Nordstrom note along the way, that doesn't hurt either.
Right. And that's it. Sometimes like we hear of incentivizing people. I actually prefer to see it as like a thank you appreciation, because they're giving their time. The one thing that none of us can get back. Money comes and goes, products come and go, but time doesn't. So if you have to do something like that, and again, this is where the value of working with the marketing team is really helpful, is how can we appreciate our customers taking their time to fill these out so that we can get the data to better serve them. And that's part of a VOC strategy.
There you go.
Just to link it back, right?
I love it. Great question from the audience. Specifically, I guess, about my experience with Nordstrom. So, do you feel your feedback is more positive or constructive improvements? Does this feedback you have influence your willingness to provide feedback? Oh, great question. So personally, I actually intentionally try to see if I have feedback in both categories, both positive and constructive, right? I think about, hey, if I were on the receiving end of this, and again, we're talking about a consumer example, but I think this could be true in a B2B environment as well. If I were on the receiving end of getting this feedback from a customer, what would I want to know? And I would want to know, hey, what worked and what didn't work, right? Because unless you like really, really royally screwed something up, I would hope that there's a little bit of both, right? And we know none of us are perfect. There's usually something a little constructive too. So I intentionally try my best to include both. I'm sure, sometimes I include just one or the other depending on the scenario, but if I have both to share, I always do. And I think, I don't know, I think again, as CS leaders, I think that's what we would hope our customers would do, right? Be willing to share both the good and the bad with us and be really, really honest and truthful. Anita, so we talked about what we should stop doing with surveys, right? We should stop using them willy-nilly and picking them at random, and start, I guess, focusing on the purpose and really narrowing in on what it is. Anything else? And we talked about starting to incorporate closed loop feedback. Anything else that we should make sure we are doing, focusing on the positive aspects of surveys? Anything else we missed that, like, hey, we need to make sure we're doing this when we do use surveys?
Right. Segmenting. I'll say it right now. Be like an orange. Oh, it's horrible. I know. Shotguns and oranges in this conversation. But be like an orange and segment your customers. So that's another part. Again, the same survey going out to everybody. Well, if you want to know what your decision makers are thinking, then send a different survey to them, or only send to them. If you're curious about end users, then send to them. If there's other stakeholders that you specifically want information about, send it to them, or your best top 20% of your customers, send it to them. So you want to segment. And the reason is, then again, you're starting to get more granular and an understanding of the differences between the segments with respect to the feedback you're getting. This is also super helpful, though, to add that qualitative element. So comment box somewhere. As much as possible, try not to just send a survey that is purely quantitative. At least add a comment box so you can start collecting that qualitative feedback. And it also gives you an opportunity, even closing the loop right there with an individual respondent to say, I noticed you responded this way. Hey, can we have a conversation about it? So there's the segmentation, closing the loop, those are, and then making sure that you are collecting the data that you need and want. So I would say that those are the top three things that that you should be considering when you're either implementing something like voice of the customer, implementing surveys for the first time, or even now post this conversation we're having to go back and ask those questions of yourself. We've been doing it this way all along. Can we change it?
Absolutely. I love that. Okay. So we focused in a little bit on surveys. I want to take it broader, take it back out to sort of the larger voice of the customer, overarching area that we talked about earlier, the biggest Russian nesting doll. So I'm curious, in your experience in talking to customer success leaders and business leaders in general, are there any big mistakes you see companies making when it comes to VOC, or misconceptions you see them having about, VOC as a concept or as a practice?
Yeah, I think one of them is not realizing that there's actually stages to a VOC program, which may or may not be in line with the growth of the company. So your growth stage and your VOC maturity stage can be two different things. And early VOC is really, it's as simple as possible. I actually, you do, it's your surveys, some customer interviews, if that's where you want to start and get it going, build it there. But the one thing I would suggest adding that is often sort of forgotten about is a governance piece. Who's responsible for this? Who's going to act on it? Who's going to own this? Who has access to the data as well? And how is that data shared? So that sounds like something that maybe should come at a later stage. But if you put those governance pieces in the beginning, then it's much easier to grow as it, from early to a growth stage to a mature VOC program. And so, asking those tough questions, whose responsibility is this? And what tends to happen in the early stages is it's one team. So no surprise, companies either have it in marketing or they have it in customer success. So that's totally fine. Start there, but then with the realization that you're going to branch out and start including other teams. Product, marketing, and sales are, I would say, three of the biggest that you want to start including as your VOC program grows. And this is why that governance piece is so important to have from the earliest stage, because as the VOC program grows, there's not only more data coming in from different sources, but now you have more teams involved, and you want to know, who is responsible for what. There's nothing worse than collecting customer feedback that, again, the customer has taken their time that they will never give back or never get back to give you this information. The worst thing is to just have it sit there unused. So the biggest misconception, I would think, is around just not having that governance piece and thinking that it comes later when it really should come right at the very start.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I'm curious, sort of related to that, how do you see, or how do you recommend that support surveys fit into that, right? More of the transactional customer satisfaction, post support interaction survey. How do you see that best fitting into that sort of overarching VOC and the governance piece?
Right. So definitely, if you can have that closer to being, most companies are already collecting that type of feedback. But start seeing, again, where can this information flow to that it makes the most sense? So we know product, so support and product, definitely, but also to marketing. And I think that people forget, and this is why having an overarching VOC strategy is helpful. Marketing can really benefit from what support and customer success know about the customers. They are on the front lines. They are hearing everything. And making that tie with marketing is important because it becomes a loop. The more that marketing can understand from support and success, the experience of the customers, they can use that to attract better fitting customers, right? And so it ends up, working really well, because anyone in customer success knows how hard it is to deal with poor fit customers.
Yeah.
So it's actually to customer success's benefit to take this information and work with marketing to attract better fitting customers.
Yes, music to my ears. I love that. That made my day. All right. So let's talk about if companies are making misconceptions about voice of customer, or making mistakes in implementing it, or just kind of glossing over it and saying, nope, we know what we're doing. We don't need to ask for feedback. I think there are some big risks, business risks in doing that. So tell us, what are those risks? What are those major risks in just saying, nope, we've got this under control. We know our product, and we're going to make the assumptions about our customers.
Yeah. And we've seen companies do this over the years, and they still continue to do it. The biggest risk, of course, is then you're going to end up losing market share, because customers' needs are constantly changing. So great that you have these assumptions that maybe you got even a year ago. So much has changed. Like, you think, like, what were we doing a year ago? We were going into the second wave of the pandemic, or second year of the pandemic. How different our world was compared to this year or the year prior. So that's the biggest risk. You're going to lose market share. Your customers are going to churn at a higher rate. And then all of the knockoff effects of those, you have with that, high customer churn. Right alongside it tends to be high employee churn as well. Unhappy employees, they leave at a much higher rate. It tends to, be more costly overall. And then, you can get into really specifics after that. But that's really what it is. Like, your customers know themselves best. So to say we know our customers, okay, that's great. You might know some, but do you know all of the problems or challenges, or how they see their problem for all of your customer segments equally? Bet you don't. So your customers know themselves best. That has to be the heart of everything. It's the smallest nesting doll, if you will. The customers know themselves best. So going to them, talking to them, finding out, like, the constructive, the positive, all of it, because they will tell you. And if they feel like they've been listened to, and that their feedback is actually making an impact, like you filling out your surveys, you're happy to do it. Like, I think that's one of the largest misconceptions about VOC is customers don't want to give feedback. They actually do. Sometimes the opportunity isn't there, or the biggest is they just feel like they're not being listened to.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, I can think of many examples of companies who don't ask for that feedback, right? Even though, guess what, their customers have it and they want to tell them, and there's just no avenue. And on the flip side, I can think of really good examples. Like HubSpot is a great example. They do a great job of asking for feedback in a lot of different ways, right? Not just with surveys, with a whole community that you can suggest product updates, all of these things, right? There are so many ways to ask for that feedback. So, it almost makes me sad when I see companies who don't take advantage of those opportunities to build those connections with their customers and ask those questions.
Yeah. And if you don't, they're going to come out in other ways. I mean, look at G2, right? Yeah. Just put up a negative review there. The company can't do anything to stop you from doing it. So, or Trustpilot, or any of those review sites, your customers are going to give feedback one way or another. And the question is, do you want to be a part of that and help, facilitate that conversation? Or do you just want to sit back and let it happen to you? And I think that's really the choice that's being made when companies don't go out and proactively seek this information from their customers. It comes out in other ways, for sure.
Yeah. Or like on Twitter, gosh, how many companies have just been bashed over the head when they mess up by millions of tweets? Yeah. So I want to actually pause my questions and ask a really good question from the audience, from Erin. She's asking, how do you navigate participation bias in customer feedback?
Oh, that's a really great question.
Yeah.
And remind me to talk about confirmation bias as well. So, Erin, love this question. So it comes back to segmenting. Sampling is what we call it in, the academic or scientific world. So you want to go through and try to get your sample sizes big enough. So then you have oh geez, the word just popped out of my head. I was up very late last night with that sick puppy of mine. So statistical significance, right? If your numbers are too small, and of course you can look this up for yourself on Google, or if there's somebody on your team who's, a bit of a numbers person can help you understand what that is. But basically, your participants, you want to choose wisely. Just like you want to segment when you're sending out your surveys, you want to do the same thing. Now, I'm assuming that that's what you mean, Erin, by participation bias. If I have it wrong, please just put something else in the chat so that I answer your question directly. See, assuming, and then now I'm asking directly, is this what you mean? Because I don't have the full context of the question. So, hey, thank you for letting us reinforce what we've been talking about. So why don't we move on to another question, Marley, and then Erin, if you don't mind doing that, I'd be happy to answer the question at that point once I have a little more context about what you mean.
Do you want to talk about confirmation bias?
Yeah, let's talk about confirmation bias. So, every single human has this. It's one of the reasons why people get so staunch in their views that if you show them all of this evidence that is contrary to what they believe, they actually become more confirmed in their beliefs than, without that other information coming in. So confirmation bias in sales, they call it happy ears. It's where you tend to look at the data and you're like, oh, that's not so bad. Or, oh, it's confirming what you already know or already think, or confirming sentiment, which may or may not be valid. Everybody does this, so it's not unique. But this is where the value of bringing in a third party, like my company does this on behalf of our clients, because we don't come in with preconceived notions. So we look at the data for what it is, not putting a spin on it because we're either looking for a particular outcome or because we have history and can say, oh, well, previously we saw this. So now that we're looking at this data, this is kind of similar. So we'll just sort of lump it in together. So confirmation bias is a real thing. This is where you're looking at your results. And again, you can put a really positive spin on things. You can, put a really negative spin on things. You can disregard things altogether. It's just confirming the opinions you have. And so either bring in a third party expert, either consultant or company, to do this work for you. That includes the things like the surveys, the focus groups, the interviews, anywhere where you have qualitative data that you're collecting. Or if your company is big enough, you can certainly pull in, a data analyst or a business analyst who is a little bit separated from the data and perhaps won't have such strong confirmation biases. Maybe your team that is collecting the data has the relationships with the customers and may, not intentionally in any way skew the data because, you're looking for certain outcomes.
Yes. And I think, we all hear about confirmation bias, even in things like politics and we hear about it all the time, but we may not think of it in this context. So I'm glad you brought that up. And Erin did chat us and give us a little bit more context. So I'll read this to you, Anita. I think of participation bias to be in multiple forms of voice of customer, from which customers choose to speak out in reviews, support, etc., to those who choose to answer surveys, those who choose to interview, etc. And that those humans might be a specific segment that are motivated to speak out.
You've got it. So I was mostly on the right track, but I'm so glad. Thank you, Erin, for for going through and qualifying that further. So there are people, Marley and I, two of them, who are happy to speak our minds. There are other people who are less inclined perhaps to speak their minds for certain things. If it's really important to us, we tend to speak up. And so there's a couple of things that you're looking at to kind of overcome that participation bias for, those of us like, the two of us who always want to give feedback, happy to at least open my mouth and, let it come out and say what I'm thinking. So this is where the different types of tools help. So it could be a survey. Some people prefer focus groups. Other people prefer one-on-one interviews, but aren't great with typing. Like, surveys are a monologue. It only goes one way. Sometimes people need to be prompted a little bit. And so places like focus groups and interviews are really helpful for that. In terms of that sort of appreciation, thank you gift, some people are really motivated by money. Some people maybe just want extra time. And that could be, a 30-minute specialist call with somebody to help them with a very specific problem that perhaps, their CSM can't help them with. Maybe it's a donation. So Erin, you're looking at many moving parts, but we're not all the same. We're motivated by different things and different modes of communication. I don't mind typing. I don't mind speaking. I know some people who hate typing but prefer speaking. So this is what you want to do, is give multiple opportunities, like Marley mentioned, even with HubSpot, giving multiple opportunities to people to have their feedback collected and heard. And so you're going to have to try different things. And of course, no surprise, your different segments will likely be motivated by different things.
And I think there's some trial and error in that too, right, Anita? Right?
Lots.
We're making assumptions when we say, hey, so far we've observed that this type of customer is more likely to respond to this type of feedback ask, and this other type of customer is more likely to respond to this. We're still making some assumptions, even if we see some data that indicates that, right? Yep. So we're going to say, all right, so we're going to try asking this persona or this segment or whatever, this question in this way via a survey. And we're going to try maybe even asking the same or similar question to this other segment or vertical or whatever via an interview, yep. Right? And well, how did that go? Did we get the number of responses that we thought we would get from each of those avenues and each of those groups, right?
Absolutely. And thank you for raising that. This is all testing. It really is, when you're going through and sampling. So we call it oversampling. So let's say you want to reach, 100 responses on a survey. Well, with response rates, if your typical response rate is fairly low, then that means you might have to to get 100 respondents, you might have to send it out to 3,000 people. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, these are all the things that you're testing, but you certainly have to make those numbers bigger, because not everybody is going to participate. And so, test, try it, didn't work, try something new. And again, I really see that marketing is a friend to customer success with this. Like, they know the language, they understand, what works and what doesn't with customers in terms of attracting them. So use their knowledge and combine it with your knowledge of the customer and see if you can, get those participation rates up in those particular segments where you're particularly lacking.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. Great point. So I know, one of the things we wanted to make sure to really focus on today is how voice of customer in general, right? Any of that feedback, any of the specific tactics we've been talking about, how it can influence retention rates, right? Having a strong voice of customer program can absolutely lead to better retention rates. We walk us through connecting those dots, how those things are related, how that works.
Absolutely. And we've already touched on some of them,
Yep.
right? So having a voice of the customer program that includes marketing is one of those big pieces. The more information that marketing can get about their customers, more than just the firmographic or demographic data, but really, what are they struggling with, how they perceive their problem, how they perceive your solution. Put it into the marketing, they have better fitting customers, or sorry, they attract better fitting customers, as well as I do. Better fitting customers are not only, cheaper to serve, they stay longer, they refer, their, loyalty goes up, retention goes up, all of those things. So I think it's one of the quickest wins that just isn't really apparent. So look for ways to maybe build that bridge between customer success and marketing. And we have more of an obvious one with sales. But again, if that's not in place, build that relationship with sales as well, for the same reason. The more that sales can understand why customers are buying, you're going to hear that in maybe your onboarding call or subsequent calls. Feed that information back to sales. It will make their job easier. They will be able to, sell to better fit customers. And then that whole cycle starts again. So that's one part of it. The second part, of course, is the data that you're receiving. You get a really good understanding. Are there certain spots in the customer journey that are particularly troublesome or difficult, or customers are having problems reaching a particular milestone? Or maybe just customers in a certain segment are having problems reaching a certain milestone. You get to get that information to figure out, well, what is it? Is it something that's lacking? Or maybe it's something we're doing that's actually causing friction and preventing them from having the type of success that they had hoped for when they first became a customer. So you increase retention that way by finding those problem areas, those blocks, those challenges that the customers are having that maybe aren't so obvious. So again, happier customers having a happier experience on the whole tend to stay longer. And then, of course, there's the one part we haven't really talked about so much, and that is by asking customers, and again, really important part, closing the loop. You build and strengthen the relationships with the customers you have. Mm-hmm. And that right there, start that increased engagement, feeling like they're valued. There's going to be bumps in the road with any product, but it's easier than to feel like maybe I want to stay. Maybe it's just a one-off, because they feel that value coming in other ways. Their opinion matters, and they know that it's making a difference. So I would say that those are the three big ways that VOC helps increase customer retention, and is particularly helpful for customer success leaders.
I think that last one is so frequently forgotten.
Yeah,
right?
and so easy.
The first two are very logical, right? Pretty scientific feeling. And the last one, it's about our feelings. It's about building that relationship, building that loyalty, making people feel valued and feel good, right? And so we tend to overlook it. So I'm really, really, really glad you brought that one up in particular. Anita, I have two more quick questions for you, but audience, if there are things you are dying to know from Anita, please put them in the Q&A tab, and I will defer my questions to get to yours.
Absolutely.
But while we're seeing if there are any more audience questions, so I'm sure there are plenty of people listening today who have sort of had a light bulb moment, an aha moment, and they're like, oh my gosh, either I need to go implement VOC, we're not doing it and I need to start, or we're doing it, but there are a couple things I want to go reevaluate and look at. So if there are people out there thinking, hey, we're talking about a lot of things, and I can't do all of the things that we've talked about today, because it can be a lot. A full-fledged VOC program is a lot of work. So if someone's out there thinking, okay, I want to do something. I want to start somewhere. You know, I don't have unlimited time or resources, but I want to do something. How should people think about prioritizing where they should start first, where they would get the most information and what would make the biggest impact? You know, if you have to sort of narrow it in.
I think you just said it there in your question is the answer. And that is, what is the information that you are currently wanting the most? Like, where do you feel like, oh, if I only had this, it would make, you know, such a difference. I would, you know, be able to then do these other things afterward. Ask yourself that question. Is it around onboarding? Is it around renewals? Is it around escalations? Is it like, where is it? And that's really the first place to start. Ask yourself, what information, and it's one of the questions actually I in our sales call that we ask, what information would you really like to know about your customers that you currently don't have? And can I tell you, like always, like that, people know. That's where you start. That's where you start. Then you figure out, is it best to use a survey? Should we do some interviews? Should we do surveys and interviews together? You know, first start with some surveys and then see if we can get people into interviews, or the other way. Interview a bunch of people, then confirm it with some surveys. But really ask yourself, like, and I'm sure there's like one or two things that really stand top of mind. Start there.
Love it. You know, just be realistic, right? What are you dying to know? Ask the question. It's okay to ask the question, everyone. All right. I love this audience question. So we will end on this one. You already shared with the audience, Anita, that you should usually replace the question of why, right? We want to know why, but we maybe don't phrase it that way, right? We use something language like tell me more, right? Are there other questions that should be avoided? Other language that should be avoided?
Yeah, I think so much. And I'll just really quickly tell you why isn't a great thing. A lot of us, when we were small and we did something, the first question that comes out of, you know, adults' mouths is, why did you do that? So it feels accusatory. We feel defensive. Doesn't matter that we're adults in a business environment now, like all that stuff still comes with us, right? It's made an impression. So anything that would perhaps diminish a person, or the other is to lead them to the answer you want. So it's called a leading question. You know, tell us, share with us, you know, how you felt when you hit your, or, you know, first milestone or something like that, right? Well, what happens if they haven't hit it yet? Well, as humans, we like to please. And so some of us would say, oh, I felt this, you know, it wasn't even true. So it's not that we're lying, but we've kind of been led that we feel that we have to give an answer. So watching for those things that might make types of questions that might make people feel maybe a bit of shame that they haven't done something, or leading them to the answer that you want. And those are sneaky. They really are. And then the last is something called a double-barreled question. And that is, I believe, a shotgun reference where you put two questions together. So would you rather have, you know, of course, I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now, but it's where two questions are shoved together and you're like, well, I could answer yes to this, but no to this, but what do I answer? Of course, like I said, I can't think of something off the top of my head right now, but we've all seen them where they're two distinct questions and you might have a different response for both, but they're stuck together into one question. So
even something as simple as, did you find value and
there you go,
and opportunity in XYZ thing, right? Anytime, I'm always like, oh, anytime there's and in there, I'm like, I need to read it again.
Yeah. And that's a double-barreled question. And how do you answer it? The problem is with it too, from an analysis perspective, you don't know what they're answering. Are they answering the first part of the question, or are they answering the second part of the question, or is it for both? So those are the types of questions you want to try to avoid.
Yes. I love it. Well, Anita, I know we are coming to the end of our time together. I want to thank you again so very much for joining me today. as always, a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. And I have to say for everybody, hit me up on LinkedIn. It's my second favorite place to hang out online besides Netflix. So feel free to connect with me there and then send me a DM. And if you want more information about VOC and all of that, more than happy to chat with you over there.
Absolutely. Please, I encourage everyone to take Anita up on that offer. Thank you all again for joining us. Reminder, you'll all receive the recording within 24 hours of this session. And I hope everyone will join us again next month for the next Customer Success Unlocked. We will be hosting a CEO panel with the CEOs of Turn Zero, Nufsaid, and Capta, who will be joining us to discuss the impact of the economy on customer success and how CS can continue to advocate for itself in today's economic and business world. So it'll be a great conversation. Hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Wonderful. Take care, everyone. Bye.